Elijah faced a devil in human skin, forced to make a choice no man should ever face. Name one of the two women he swore to protect, and watch the other die before his eyes. It happened in a sun-scorched canyon at high noon, where even the sky seemed to hold its breath. The bandits had them bound, kneeling in the dirt, certain they'd broken the mountain man's spirit. But when Elijah spoke a name, his voice carried no sorrow, only an icy void that chilled his enemies to the bone. This is how it all went down. Hey there, listener. How's it going, and where are you tuning in from? Settle in to hear how one man outwitted fate and proved the real choice is not bending to evil, but finding a third way. Elijah's boots crunched on the dry earth, kicking up red dust that clung to his weathered pants. His cabin sat tucked against a jagged cliff, half hidden by gnarled pines, where the canyon's silence was broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. He lived here with Anna and Leah, two sisters he'd pulled from the clutches of human traffickers years back. Folks in the nearest town whispered they were his wives, but that was a lie born of gossip. Their bond wasn't love, in the usual sense. It was a pact, forged in survival, stronger than blood. Anna, tough as iron, knelt by the fire pit, sharpening a hatchet with steady hands. Her dark braids swung as she worked, her eyes scanning the horizon for trouble. Leah sat cross-legged nearby, mending a torn saddlebag, her quiet focus a contrast to Anna's restless energy. She had a knack for reading people, spotting lies in a glance. Elijah leaned against the cabin's rough-hewn wall, his rifle resting easy in his arms, watching the women with a quiet pride. They weren't just survivors. They were his family built from shared scars. The canyon stretched out before them, its red walls baking under a merciless sun, and the air carried the faint tang of sagebrush. This place was their fortress, a refuge from a world that had tried to break them all. But Elijah knew better than most. Peace like this never lasted long. The sun dipped low, painting the canyon walls a bloody red as Elijah hauled a bucket of stones from the collapsed well. Anna worked beside him, her hands calloused and sure, prying loose rocks with a crowbar. Leah knelt nearby, sifting dirt for salvageable nails, her fingers quick but careful. They moved like a single unit, each knowing their role without a word. Sweat beaded on Elijah's brow, stinging his eyes, but he didn't pause. Work like this kept them alive. Later, under a star-crusted sky, they gathered around a crackling fire. Anna stitched a tear in Elijah's old coat, her needle flashing in the firelight, while Leah's soft voice spun an old tale about a lone wolf outwitting a pack. The story wasn't just for comfort. It was a reminder of what they faced out here. Men are worse than wolves, Anna muttered, not looking up from her sewing. Elijah nodded, his jaw tight, knowing she meant the kind of men who'd left scars on all three of them. Leah's eyes flicked to the darkness beyond the fire, where the canyon's silence hid threats no animal could match. "They're still out there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah poked the fire, sending sparks skyward, his silence louder than any promise. This wasn't a home built on soft words or dreams. It was a fortress of grit, held together by the kind of trust that only comes from surviving hell together. A faint rumble broke the canyon's stillness, like thunder too stubborn to fade. Elijah froze, his hand tightening on the axe he was sharpening, his eyes narrowing at the horizon. A cloud of dust rose in the distance, kicked up by hooves, too many for a lone rider. Anna dropped the bucket she was carrying, water sloshing onto the cracked earth, and Leah stood, shielding her eyes against the morning glare. "Riders," Elijah said, his voice low, already counting the shapes emerging from the haze. 10 men, maybe 12, their horses moving with purpose. These weren't drifters. They were Barrett Calhoun's men, their black hats and glinting spurs marking them as his dogs. Calhoun, a land baron who ruled with fear instead of coin, had been sniffing around Elijah's patch for months, greedy for the spring that never ran dry. The air grew thick with the smell of horse sweat and leather as the riders closed in. Elijah set the axe down slow and deliberate and grabbed his rifle. Anna and Leah flanked him, their faces hard but eyes sharp with fear they wouldn't voice. The fight was quick and brutal. Elijah took down 2 men with precise shots, but a rifle butt to his skull dropped him to his knees. Anna swung a shovel, cracking a bandit's arm, but numbers overwhelmed them. As the dust settled, Elijah's hands were bound, blood trickling down his temple. Calhoun dismounted, his boots crunching the gravel, a cold smile curling under his mustache. He hadn't come to talk. He'd come to take. The air inside the cabin felt thick, heavy, with the stink of sweat and gun oil. Elijah knelt on the dirt floor, ropes biting into his wrists, his head still throbbing from the blow. Anna and Leah were beside him, their hands bound, their faces pale but defiant under the flickering lantern light. Barrett Calhoun stood over them, his shadow stretching long across the rough wooden walls, his polished boots gleaming like he'd never walked a hard mile. His men lounged around, rifles loose in their hands, smirking like they'd already won. Calhoun's voice was smooth, almost lazy, as he spoke. "This land's mine now, Elijah. That spring's too good for a loner like you." But his eyes gleamed with something darker than greed. He wanted to break the mountain man, to grind his legend into the dust. He paced, slow and deliberate, studying the sisters' faces, catching the way Anna's jaw clenched and Leah's eyes darted. "You've got a family here," he said, his smile twisting. "That's your weakness." He leaned close, his breath sour with whiskey. "I could take your land and walk away, but where's the fun in that? I want everyone in this territory to know who owns you." He straightened, his voice dropping colder. "We're going to put on a show, and you're the star." Elijah's gaze stayed locked on the floor, but his mind was racing, mapping every man, every weapon, every creak in the room. The sisters' fear hung heavy, but so did their trust in him, and that weight was heavier than any rope. The sun burned high, turning the canyon into a furnace, the heat pressing down like a heavy hand. Elijah, Anna, and Leah stood bound in the open, their shadows short and sharp on the cracked earth. Barrett Calhoun faced them, his black hat tilted back, a cruel grin splitting his face. His men formed a loose circle, their boots scuffing the dirt, rifles glinting in the harsh light. "You think you're a king out here, Elijah," Calhoun said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Built your little world, you and your queens. But a king can only have one." He drew his revolver slow and theatrical, letting the click of the hammer echo. "Pick one to live. Name her, and the other's dead before the sound fades." He gave them 60 seconds, his eyes gleaming with sadistic delight. Anna's breathing hitched, her bound hands trembling, while Leah's face was wet with silent tears. The bandits chuckled, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Elijah stood still, sweat dripping down his neck, his eyes locked on Calhoun, not with fear, but with a cold, calculating focus. The ultimatum wasn't just about death. It was about tearing apart everything he'd fought to protect. The air grew heavier, each second ticking by like a hammer on an anvil. Calhoun leaned closer, his voice a low hiss. "Choose, mountain man, or I'll make it worse for both." Elijah's silence was a wall, but behind it, his mind churned, searching for a crack in Calhoun's game. The sisters' eyes met his, their trust a blade in his gut, sharper than any threat. The canyon's heat pressed down, thick and suffocating, as the minute Calhoun gave them ticked away. Anna's voice cracked first, sharp and desperate, cutting through the tense silence. "Choose Leah, Elijah. She can't make it alone out here." Her words were a plea, her eyes fierce, despite the ropes biting her wrists. Leah shook her head, tears streaming down her dust-streaked face, her voice barely holding together. "No, save Anna. She's the strong one. My life doesn't matter." Their words clashed, each sister's love for the other twisting the knife in Elijah's gut. The bandits snickered, their boots shifting in the dirt, enjoying the sisters' pain like it was a show. Calhoun stood with his revolver loose in his hand, his grin wide, savoring every second of their torment. Elijah stayed silent, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes never left Calhoun. He noticed the way the man's fingers twitched, the overconfidence in his men's lazy stances, the way one bandit's rifle hung too low. The sisters' voices faded into a dull roar in his ears, their pleas tearing at him, but he wasn't listening to them. He was reading the enemy. Every sob from Leah, every defiant glare from Anna, was another piece of Calhoun's cruel game, but Elijah was building his own. The sun beat down, sweat stung his eyes, and the canyon held its breath. He wasn't choosing between the women, he was choosing how to break the trap. His fingers flexed behind his back, testing the ropes, feeling for any give. The canyon air hung heavy, the sun a relentless hammer overhead as Calhoun's minute ran out. His revolver gleamed, pressed against Anna's temple, the metal hot from the noon blaze. "Time's up, mountain man," he hissed, his voice sharp with glee. "Who lives?" The bandits leaned in, their eyes hungry for Elijah's surrender. Anna's breath caught, her face tight with resolve, while Leah's soft sobs broke the silence like falling stones. Elijah raised his head slow, his gaze locking onto Calhoun's, unflinching, cold as the spring water he fought to keep. The world seemed to pause, the canyon itself holding its breath. Then, in a voice low and clear, Elijah spoke one word. "Leah." The name landed like a spark in dry grass. Anna's sharp gasp cut through the stillness, her eyes wide with betrayal, while a bandit let out a smug chuckle thinking the game was done. Calhoun's grin widened, his victory sealed, or so he thought. Elijah's face didn't crack, no trace of despair, just a hard, unreadable calm. His bound hands shifted slightly, fingers brushing a jagged stone he'd nudged loose when they forced him to his knees. The bandits didn't notice, too caught up in their boss's triumph. Leah's tears stopped, her eyes searching Elijah's, catching something no one else saw, a flicker of intent. Anna's shoulders sagged, but her gaze darted to Elijah, and in that split second she understood. His choice wasn't surrender. It was a signal, a spark to ignite their fight. The canyon baked under the midday sun, dust swirling as Calhoun nodded to one of his men. The bandit, a wiry man with a scar across his lip, stepped toward Anna, his knife glinting with cruel intent. Elijah's voice still hung in the air, the name Leah echoing like a thrown gauntlet. The bandits relaxed, their rifles dipping, certain the mountain man was broken. Anna's eyes flicked to Elijah, catching the slight twitch of his hands behind his back, the sharp stone he'd palmed while kneeling. She understood in a heartbeat. His choice was no betrayal, but a signal only she'd catch. The scarred bandit grabbed Anna's arm, yanking her forward, but Elijah moved faster. With a grunt, he sliced the ropes on his wrists, the stone cutting deep into his palm. Blood dripped onto the dirt as he lunged, not at Calhoun, but at the nearest rifleman, slamming into him like a charging bull. Anna dropped to the ground, dragging the scarred man down with her, her bound hands clawing for his knife. Leah froze, her breath hitching, but her eyes stayed on Elijah, trusting his lead. The bandits scrambled, caught off guard, their smug laughs turning to shouts. Calhoun's grin faltered, his hand fumbling for his revolver. Elijah's move wasn't just defiance. It was chaos, deliberate and sharp, cracking the bandits' confidence like brittle clay. The canyon rang with grunts and scuffling boots, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. Elijah's plan, hidden in a single word, had turned the game on its head. Chaos erupted in the canyon, the air thick with dust and the sharp crack of gunfire. Elijah barreled into the rifleman, wrenching the weapon free and swinging it like a club, the wooden stock cracking against the man's jaw. Blood sprayed, mixing with the red dirt underfoot. Anna writhed on the ground, her bound hands grappling with the scarred bandit, her knees slamming into his gut as she tore his knife away. Leah, still tied, stumbled toward a nearby rock, her eyes wide but focused, trusting Elijah's plan. He shouted one word, "Uphill," their signal for the narrow gorge where they'd stash supplies for a fight like this. Bullets kicked up dirt around him, one grazing his shoulder, searing like a hot iron. He didn't flinch, his body moving on instinct fueled by a rage that burned hotter than the canyon sun. A second bandit charged, but Elijah drove the rifle butt into his chest, dropping him gasping. Anna cut her ropes with the stolen knife, freeing Leah in a swift motion. The sisters sprinted for the gorge, their boots pounding the earth. Calhoun roared orders, his voice sharp with fury, his men fumbling to regain control. Elijah took a slug in the thigh, pain exploding, but he kept moving, drawing fire to give the women time. The canyon walls echoed with shouts and shots, the fight a brutal dance where every step meant life or death. Elijah wasn't a hero. He was a cornered animal fighting for the only family he had. The gorge was a narrow slash in the canyon, its walls steep and shadowed, swallowing the gunfire's echo. Elijah staggered, blood soaking his pant leg, each step a knife in his thigh. Anna and Leah reached the hidden cache, a battered crate tucked behind a boulder, holding a rusty revolver and a handful of shells. Anna's hands shook as she loaded it, her eyes darting to Elijah, still fighting in the open. He slammed a bandit's head against a rock, the crack drowned by shouts and shots. Leah crouched, her breath ragged, passing bullets to Anna, who fired steady, picking off a man aiming at Elijah's back. The air stank of gunpowder and sweat, the canyon a furnace of chaos. Elijah's vision blurred, pain clawing at him, but he pushed forward, his eyes locked on Calhoun. The land baron stood apart, his revolver raised, his face twisted with rage at the unraveling of his game. Elijah charged, tackling Calhoun into the dirt, their bodies rolling in a brutal tangle. Fists met flesh, blood sprayed, and Calhoun's gun skittered away. A stray bullet caught Elijah's side, a burning jolt, but he pinned Calhoun, his hands closing on the man's throat. Anna's shots kept the last bandits at bay, their numbers thinning, their confidence shattered. Leah whispered, "Hold on, Elijah," her voice a lifeline. The fight wasn't about winning. It was about buying time for the sisters to live. Elijah's strength faded, but his grip on Calhoun tightened, a final stand for the family he'd sworn to protect. The canyon fell quiet, the gunfire's echo fading into the rustle of wind through dry sagebrush. Bodies littered the ground, blood pooling in the dirt, the air heavy with the metallic tang of death. Elijah slumped against a boulder, his breath ragged, blood seeping from his thigh and side, staining the earth red. Anna and Leah scrambled to him, their hands frantic as they tore strips from Leah's skirt to bind his wounds. Anna pressed hard against the gash in his side, her face set, though her fingers trembled. "Stay with us, you stubborn bastard," she muttered, her voice thick with fear she wouldn't admit. Leah knelt close, her hands gentle, wiping sweat and blood from Elijah's face with her sleeve. "You chose me," she whispered, her eyes searching his, confused and raw. Elijah's cracked lips parted, his voice a hoarse rasp. "I chose you both." Knew Anna'd catch the signal. His words hung heavy, a confession of trust forged in fire. Calhoun lay dead nearby, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. His reign ended in the dust. The sisters worked fast, their movements practiced, born from years of surviving together. Elijah's hand gripped Anna's, weak but firm, a silent vow that they weren't losing him yet. The canyon stood witness, its red walls unmoved, but the three of them were bound tighter than ever, their pact sealed in the blood spilled for their freedom. Months later, the canyon stood unchanged, its red cliffs baking under a relentless sun. The cabin looked the same, its weathered logs sturdy, but new tripwires and snares glinted in the shadows, a silent promise of lessons learned. Elijah sat by the fire pit, his movements slow, the fresh scars on his side and thigh pulling tight under his shirt. He'd survived, but the fight had carved pieces of him away, left in the blood-soaked dirt of that brutal day. Anna sharpened a knife nearby, her hand steady, her eyes scanning the horizon like always. Leah tended a small herb patch, her quiet humming carrying on the breeze, a fragile thread of peace. They didn't talk about the fight much, but it lived in the silences between them, in the way Anna's shoulders relaxed when Elijah stood watch, or how Leah's hand lingered on his arm when passing him a tin cup. "We're still here," Elijah said one night, his voice rough, staring into the fire's glow. Anna nodded, her lips tight, while Leah's eyes met his, soft but fierce. The stars above burned bright, the canyon's quiet no longer heavy with fear. Their pact, born in desperation, had been forged anew in blood and trust. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a family, carved from the same hard stone as the land they fought for, unyielding even when the world tried to break them.